leases that have come up. I had a discussion this morning about intermediaries, so I just want to cover this real quick. So let me just slide this over, hopefully. Can you all see that okay?
Now go ahead and do that one.
That?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, we good? Okay, so just so y'all know, intermediary, we on every listing and every buyer rep agreement, we check the box that says intermediary authorized, but that doesn't mean you're an intermediary. That just means it's possible. So we want to check those boxes because intermediary means that the transaction, the entire transaction is with the broker. Remember, everything you do in real estate, once you're under a broker, is done in the broker's name. So Competitive Edge is the broker, and they have both the buyer and the seller, or the landlord and the tenant, under their agency relationship. So that's what an intermediary is. And it could be that you're the only agent. And if you look through this notice down here, you would put up here the seller's name on this box, and then the prospect would be the buyer, the seller, the landlord, or the tenant, whatever parties go in here. And then here under D, you're going to mark that the broker will or will not appoint licensees. If you're the only agent, then it'll be will not, because you're representing both parties yourself. If you check this box, then this would be the case where, let's say, Maureen is representing the seller and I'm representing the prospect. Okay, so we put our names here if there's agents involved in the transaction in the same company. If it's not a intermediary, that means you've got an agent from another company, and that would not be an intermediary relationship. So you may have it on back agent as a required form, and you would just exempt it if that's on there. So you don't have to fill it out. I think that was what the situation was this morning. Now, it's also possible that you have a customer, okay? A customer is not represented by anybody. So let's just say that you do an open house and somebody comes in and they want to purchase your property, and you would ask them, do you need representation? And they say, no, I know everything about real estate. I'm an expert, blah, blah, blah. Buyers are liars, but we don't say that. So they say, no, I don't want representation. So they would be a customer, and you would still have your agency. You would not be an intermediary. You would have your agency relationship already with your seller, and the only requirement you have with the buyer, who's now a customer, would to give them the IABS form, so that they know that they have been told they can have representation, and there's ways in which the broker can work. So that's the only requirement if they are not represented by you or another agent, is to give them the IABS form. Does anyone, we're going to do an agency presentation anyway, but I wanted to just cover that because that was brought up this morning. Anybody have any questions on that?
Is this in regard to Don Moore's presentation that's coming up on residential leases?
No, I think Don Moore's presentation on the residential leases is the new thing on the new contracts coming up in April. Okay. On smart devices and things like that, cameras and all that. So no, this is just the agency. We're going to do maybe the next session we'll do a whole presentation on agency and how what your obligations are and the fiduciary and all that. We'll do that. But I just wanted to cover intermediary. Just remember, if you're representing both parties, or another agent in the company is representing the other side, whether it's the buyer, seller, landlord, or tenant, then you need to have this form filled out. Okay? And you just got to be there's the only thing you got to be careful about is, if you're the only agent, you're basically a facilitator. You're just, you're not able to give advice on prices or anything. All you're required to do is treat all the parties honestly and fairly. So you can't, you're going to help them get a mortgage, help them get an inspection, blah, blah, blah. You're going to do your due diligence to get the transaction closed correctly. But when it comes to advice on what to ask for or what the offer price should be or anything like that, if they elect to be an intermediary, you're just a facilitator. Okay? But we'll go over all that another time. So if you have any questions on intermediary, just feel free to call me. Okay? No. Can you see my screen okay?
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay, do I need to go full again?
Danelle? He
How's
he
that
can,
look?
Select at the top of the screen on the right-hand side, hit it's a square.
How's that?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so we're going to talk about leases today. And, you know, we do a lot of leases as a company. I probably do 20 leases a week that our company is doing. So it's a big part of our business. The company doesn't really make very much. You know, we only make $50 on a lease, but it is a way for you to, we encourage you to do as many leases as you can. And hopefully you develop the prospect that's going to be going to lease the property so that they become buyers, a year from now when the lease is up. So we want you to do leases. And, like Richard Harris, he's on with us. He's trying to get in with this Op City, get all these leases done, these 3 up front, so that he can start getting into an experienced agent. And then the money starts, your referrals start getting a lot better, a lot bigger. So, don't turn down leases unless it's just crazy. Like they want you to drive, 100 miles for, $1,000 lease or something. I mean, you may not want to do that. That's your business. But if you can, we encourage you to do leases. So what's required? How does it work? The first thing is we always do an IABS form. That's true for anybody, buyer, seller, landlord, or tenant. You're going to do the buyer. It's really called a buyer-tenant representation agreement. You all know that. So you fill out the same form. The only thing is, and we'll go over the form in just a minute, but you need to put the percentage in there that you're going to ask, and I'll go over that in just a minute. The commission that's in the MLS, on the MLS sheet, if it says 20%, 30%, 40%, 50%, whatever it is, that's what your commission is if you get an executed lease with that particular broker that because you're representing the tenant. And the only other thing we really have to do is you have to give the people an application form, and you have to have one form for every person that's going to live in the house that's over 18 years old. Okay, so these are all requirements. And then you collect the money for the lease application. And most companies charge somewhere between $40 and $60 per applicant, per person over 18. And then they run the credit check. You don't do anything other than give them the lease. And if the other agent you communicate with says, we're going to run your application, then they're going to want the money because they pay that out of their own funds. So usually it's a money order or cash or, PayPal or, whatever source you can get them satisfied. Okay. And then the landlord's agent writes the lease. So you don't even write the lease. You don't have to worry about it. So this is all great. I mean, it's really, the hard part is showing the properties and, getting them to fill out the application. You don't fill out the application, they do. Okay, now this property code 92, I can't overemphasize how important this is. This is all the rules that the state of Texas requires for people that lease properties to tenants. And there are things like peepholes or a way to look outside the door if somebody comes up to the door. So if you have a front door that's got a little glass window next to it and you can see out, then you don't need a peephole in that door. But all exterior doors have to have a way to look outside to who's at the door. And so
Stop you there for a second.
Yes, go ahead.
On the doors with the peephole, If it does not have a peephole, is the tenant allowed to install one or ask the landlord to install one, or how's that work?
Right. Well, the first thing is, let me cover it all, and then I'm going to tell you what I think you should do, what the company policy is. Okay, so peepholes are one thing. Smoke detectors are another thing. They have to have smoke. There's rules on every bedroom has to have a smoke detector. I think entryways into bedrooms have to have a smoke detector. There's certain number per, depending on the house, where they need to be located, and it's in the property codes. And then the other thing is locks. There has to be deadbolts, and they're weird because the deadbolt, I mean, I don't really like this rule, but I mean, we got to live by it, is one of the deadbolts on all exterior doors has to be where you can't open the door from the outside. So you have to have like a plate and then the deadbolt on the door so that you can only open the deadbolt from the inside. So, this is not what I like very much, because if you had somebody injured or something like that inside the house and they had it locked, you'd have to break the door down or break a window or something. But it is in the property codes. Okay, so what's our obligation as a tenant rep? Okay, we're representing a tenant, and you walk into a house that's released and there's nothing done. It doesn't have the peepholes, doesn't have the deadbolts, it may or may not have the smoke detectors. You are liable as you're representing a tenant, you are liable to that tenant if something happens to that tenant after they move in and this house is not up to code. Somebody gets robbed, broken into, injured, assault, it could be anything. You recommended and you were representing this person as their agent to protect them. So the landlord is liable, the landlord's agent is liable, and the tenant representation agent is liable. All of us are liable. So my company policy is we don't lease properties to anyone without them having the property codes met. So when you go in, if it's not there, you got to talk to the other agent, and they may say, well, we're not going to do it. Well, then you've got a choice. Either you're going to do it with the permission of the landlord, or you don't lease that property. You don't do it. You say, hey, I can't, unless you're going to waive all liability, to the tenant. I tell you, I have read of millions of dollars in lawsuits against tenants and landlords that did not follow these codes, and something bad happened to the tenant. So we don't do it. We just go through the house. When you show properties, you can tell pretty quickly. If the deadbolts are not there, you can tell. If there's no peephole and you can't see out the front door, then there's no property code done. So you tell and put it as part of your lease, put it as part of your deal. Say, we will lease this property for X amount of dollars so long as the landlord agrees to bring this house up to property codes. And we've got a guy that does it for like $300 or something like that to go in, change everything out, get all the smoke detectors up to speed, put the peepholes in, put the deadbolts in. Most major locksmith companies, they do it as well. So it's not a big expense, but it is something that can be very dangerous if we don't follow it. Okay, did that answer your question, Elliot?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Well, yeah, it did. Well, well, here's the thing: the front door, it's frosted, so you can see like the image of someone at the door, but you can't really tell who they are. So, just curious how that needs to be approached, just with the landlord.
It's a little bit of a gray area. I don't know. I would say that we need to put a peephole or some way to look outside. We had the case you probably have heard this if you guys have been around for a while, but there was a case in Houston where Coldwell Banker had the lease, and they leased a property out, and it was a townhouse, and the the lady came home and she went through the garage, and the way it was set up, it had the garage in the rear, then you had a door going into a small utility room, and then the kitchen. You probably have seen, floor plans, something like that. She came home, she was in the kitchen making for lunch. She left the garage door open, the big door, the double door, and some guy came in and knocked on the door going into the utility room, and she opened it, and he came in and assaulted her. She sued Coldwell Banker for $5 million and won the case. And the reason is there was no peephole in that door that she could have looked out there and seen someone that she didn't know and was able to lock the door. So exterior doors are doors that go into the garage. That's considered an exterior door. So, you don't make enough money on these leases to put yourself at liability on this. So make sure that, before you have them sign a lease, that you get an agreement. Could be you and the other agent share the cost. Maybe they just got to get permission from the landlord to convert the property, because a lot of them don't want to do it. They live there as an individual. This is just for leases, not for sale, just for leases. Sale, then you don't have to have all of that done. Okay.
Is there any way to write under the contract?
$5 and you drill a hole and be done with it.
Okay,
Yeah,
hold on.
I
Two
think
people talking at the same time. Okay.
I think Pi is asking the question about writing it up. I mean, when I submit a lease application, I do put in there, I actually copy and paste the property code, and, per property code 92, especially if I go into a property and there are no peepholes, or if there's something that's missing, I'll copy the property code and put it in the lease application, and basically say, per that code, tenant is asking landlord at landlord expense to make those accommodations.
Yep.
I had a lease at one point where the listing agent came back and said, no, the landlord's not going to do any of that. And I replied back to her and I said, I completely understand. Will he approve me paying for it if he approves my tenant's application, because my tenants really wanted this property? And I said, and just so you know, that just because you're representing this landlord, it is, you are in violation of this as well. You're putting your license at risk by not convincing him to do this. And when my tenant went back to, of course she came back and said, the landlord says, yes, you can do it and all this stuff. And I told my clients, I'm going to pay to have it done. And, when we went to go through to do the walkthrough, because I told them, I said, we can't do it before you do the walkthrough and lease it. It'll be the day before you move in, but as long as you have the application approved, because I said, I don't want to pay for something if you decide you want to change your mind. And so we go to do the walkthrough, and the landlord, the listing agent, came back and said he decided to go ahead and do it, and he had put peepholes in, the locks in, and everything. So I didn't have to do it. But it's just one of those things that, yes, you can write it in the lease application if you notice that those things are missing, and try to hold them accountable. But at the end of the day, if your tenant likes it, and it's worth you spending, $100, $150 to have it done,
Go for it. Perfect. Great. Now, does somebody else have a question?
Can I add to that?
I just 1 second. Brenda, I just copied and pasted the link to go out and look at the property code there in the chat room. So any of you want to, copy that over and save it, that'll help you.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Jennifer.
Yeah, I was just going to say that a lot of times the listing agents have not heard of this, or they're unaware. And so I always refer to, I let them know it's in the lease in 19A. And, so it's something that a lot of times you will have to bring up to the other side.
Absolutely. Yeah, they don't, remember we got 40,000 plus agents out there that don't get any of this kind of training that you're getting. So, well, good. Okay. Anybody else on the property codes? Just, you can tell when you walk in. I mean, you walk into a leased property, just look at the doors. If there's not a peephole in the door going out to the garage, then they haven't brought it up to speed. So you're going to have to ask for it. And that's a good sign. So if there's like a lot of times you see a front door that's got like a little side window, like a little 6-inch window along each side of the door for looks. And if you can see out onto the front where the door is, that satisfies it. You don't need a peephole in that one. But a solid door with no way to look outside, got to have it. Okay, and then the other item is this inventory and condition report. And that's one of the things that's in zip forms. And you should have this if you get a tenant that wants to move in the day before they move in or within a couple of days after they move in. You need to go through the property and mark. And I'll go over that list in just a minute. But it basically says the condition of the house. And then a year from now, when they move out or about to move out, the landlord comes back, hey, there's a hole in the wall over here. And you've got the evidence that that hole was in there when you moved in. Then they can't go back and claim that they're going to deduct from their deposit the cost of fixing that hole if it was there prior to. And that's just an example. So we'll go over that in just a minute. And then remember, this is a potential buyer that you're working with. So even though, like Danelle said, she paid for or offered to pay, maybe she even, lost money by having the property code done on this particular deal. If she can continue these people and treat them like $1 million buyers, they're going to love you and they're going to buy through you a year from now or refer them to their friends and stuff like that. So follow up. These are your clients. They're not the landlord's client. They're your clients. Okay, then the landlord, and I'm just going to highlight the same thing. You got the IABS form, the property code. That's you have a listing agreement, and our company policy is that we pay the other agent 50% of the first month's rent. That's our company policy. So, there's not a lot of money in this, but you want to be fair. We want to act like a professional company that's legitimate. And some of these little companies that offer 20% stuff, I hate it. It should be, you can't tell them that it has to be 50%. That's your call to make. But our company policy is we offer 50% to the cooperating agent. And we have the MLS, the input sheet, and I'll go over that in a minute. You're going to collect the application fee from the other agent that brings you the lease application, and you only run one at a time. You don't run a whole bunch of them and see which one's best. If you get a bunch of applications at the same time, you and your client go through the application, say this one looks like the best. It's got the most income. It's got the, job, the references or whatever you have on the application, and you run one at a time. And if that one doesn't work, then you can go to the second one, but don't run multiple times. It's not fair to the people that paying $50 or whatever it is for each application. And you can do the credit report and the background check through CCAR. We're registered in there for all of our agents. I think it's $38 or $36 for a national background check and credit report. You can call them and get the details on that. They're going to charge your credit card. That's why you want to get, PayPal or cash or money order or something for the credit card, because they're going to charge you for the background check. And then you write the lease, which can be pretty lengthy. I think the lease is like 14 or 15 pages, so it's pretty lengthy. We'll go over that in a minute. The security deposit is always made out to the landlord, okay? Always. We don't get involved in holding funds for the landlord. That's their job. That's commingling monies, and we don't do that. So just remember, security deposit, whatever that amount is made out to the landlord, and that's their responsibility to take care of that, during the time of the lease. We get the first month's rent, and if you're representing the landlord, it's supposed to be made out to Competitive Edge, and then we need a W-9 for the other broker, because we're going to pay them whatever commission that they are entitled to. Hopefully it's 50%. We send that to the other broker, and then we take out the $50, and then we pay you the remainder. Okay, whatever your deal is. Okay, is that complicated? So everyone sort of understand how these numbers work. And I'll really work with you on, if you're representing the landlord, I mean, sometimes the people make the check out, both checks out to the landlord. And if you get that, we'll work out. I mean, I don't want you to go and cancel a check. I mean, it's supposed to go to competitive edge. Sometimes the landlord gets both checks made out to the landlord, and then the landlord sends us the amount for the other agent plus your commission. And I can work through that. We'll make it work. So when you get a situation where it's not made out to competitive edge, just give us a call and we'll work through it on it. Okay, and then the same thing protects the landlord is that inventory and condition report. Okay, all right, any questions on these two situations, tenant and landlord?
And the ABB form, is that
Okay,
standard?
Lizette, did you have a question?
That is the ABB form, isn't that standard to give to the other agent, the listing agent? When
Are you talking about the IBS?
oh, the broker to broker.
Oh,
Yes, they broker to broker. If yes, you need to have that on file, which tells you your commission, especially if you do an op city. I mean, I need that because I send that to op city. So yes, we need that. Okay.
Hey, so Mal, on that,
Go ahead.
Mal, on that same topic, if they don't present it, should we just go ahead and present the ABB?
If they don't present what?
Did you get my question? I'm sorry.
No, I didn't quite get that. Say it again.
No, I said if they don't present it to us, does it matter who presents it? The ABB?
It doesn't really matter who gets it as long as you get it executed. Okay, as long as everybody signs it, you're good. I mean, if you get it from them, you can do it yourself. Okay, I mean, people have asked me that before. Whose responsibility is? It's our responsibility to make sure all the documents are done.
I think he's having some problems.
Richard, your connection is going in and out, so it's.
Okay, so this should be your template for the tenant. So it's got information broker service. Somebody still asking a question?
Richard, you might, I know you're not on mute right now, and because the connection, it's like real choppy, so I'm not sure if you're asking a question or not.
I'll go ahead and mute him down and then he can come back in. All right.
And
Okay.
I know Mal's sharing zip forms with everyone. If you're a new agent on the call and you joined after like the October, November, don't panic. He's showing zip forms. These same templates are in Transaction Desk. The view will look a little bit different, but you've got the same information. So don't panic and think, wait a minute, that's not what my screen looks like when I go in to do contracts. It's just that he's showing zip forms versus Transaction Desk, but it's all the same template. Okay, go ahead, Mal. I just wanted to bring that up.
Can
Yeah,
you just
okay,
say
so
what is
here's-
ABB you are talking about?
That's the agreement between brokers. That's where if you're the tenant rep, you want to have that on file that shows how much you're going to get paid, and and then signed by you and the other broker. Okay, and we need to get, if we're the listing agent, we need it so that we know who to pay. Okay,
Oh,
it's an
got it.
agreement. It's like an agreement between brokers. And I'll show you that in just a minute.
Thank you.
Okay, so this is the tenant representation agreement.
And now just select the full screen underneath the R on the left-hand side.
Okay, there you go.
Poor Mal, he doesn't.
That's okay. That's good. We're all in this together. Okay, so here you'd put the client's name up here. You can put their address on there if you want to. I'm not really too worried about that. If you want to do that, that's good. Of course, they're going to be moving, to a different location. Here you put your mark. I mean, it's very similar to it's a buyer-tenant representation agreement. It's got everything. You need this to be paid. So this is an important document. You don't get your commission without this thing being fully executed. So you put the day that you meet him and the day, that you're working with him when it ends, 30 days from now, 60 days, whatever. And it's the same as the buyer rep agreement. There's where I talked about the intermediary. You always check that box. And here you put the commission. This is between you and the tenant now, remember. So this is sort of we always recommend you put 50% in here. And the reason is if you really get a jerk as a tenant, and the landlord or their broker does not pay 50%, let's say they put 20%, on the MLS that has 20%. If you have 50% here, read this thing here. If such person refuses to pay the broker the amount specified, the client will pay the broker the amount specified less the amount the broker receives from such person. So let's say on the MLS it says 20%. If you really want to enforce this, you could collect the other, 30% from the tenant. There's nothing that says that landlord has to pay the full commission. It could be anybody. So I've never enforced this even though I see on there 25% or whatever it is on the MLS. But if sometimes, you may talk the tenant really, really wants and says, I'll pay the difference. Fine. There's nothing that says he can't pay. It doesn't matter as long as. Okay, rent protection period. I mean, this is pretty much, I need to change this to Henderson County. It's pretty much the same as what we've been doing with the buyer rep agreement. Any questions on the buyer tenant representation agreement? This is all pretty basic stuff like we go over with a regular deal.
Yeah, on the I'll wait till later. Never mind.
That's okay. Go ahead.
On the buyer's representation agreement, let me pull it up on mine.
Okay.
On paragraph 3, can the market area be the specific address that you're under contract or going under contract on?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
It doesn't.
You can put anything in there you want to put in there. You can put an address, you can put a subdivision, you can put a city, you can put North Texas, you can put the state of Texas. I mean, you can do anything that you want to. Remember, it's got a place down here for the broker to initial and the client to initial. So whatever you guys do, just make sure everyone understands what you're doing. And then you can, this is an agreement between you and the client. So you can do anything you want to. As long as it's in the state of Texas, you're good. Can't do it for, yes.
I have been putting surrounding areas because mine just says Collin. It says only 2 areas. So I've been adding and surrounding areas because if we go outside of this and this end up coming up like maybe the court and then we're in a different area, that could be a little technicality. So
yeah.
I think I'll start putting North Texas in though, because that at least
that covers a big territory, right? That's pretty, where does North Texas end? When does it become Middle Texas or whatever? That's pretty vague. So you can do whatever you want to do. As long as you've got an agreement between the parties, you're fine. Any other questions on the buyer rep agreement? Buyer tenant rep? Okay, this is the application, the lease application. Again, see, each occupant and co-applicant 18 years old must submit a separate application. Okay? You don't fill this out. You give this to the client and they fill it out. You can put the property address in here, what the rent is, and what the security deposit is. You can take that right off the MLS. And you can fill in this part, and then after that, they fill it in. Okay? Any questions on this? And then you turn this application into the listing agent. You got a pet agreement. You know, if you want to, if they've got pets, you're going to have to fill this out and put this, all the, you know, the type and the color and the size and the weight and, you know, what kind of animal it is.
Hey, Mal.
Yep.
Hey,
Yep.
hey, so Mal, we are making the assumption that that they're going to want a TAR, but in about 50% of the cases I've seen, sometimes they have their own online. They're just directing it to. So I'm directing the client to a link,
Yeah.
and they're actually applying directly online
Right.
at the
Yeah.
property management website. Just FYI.
Yeah, that does happen. And, you know, we just got to make sure that we're protecting our clients. So, you know, this is not, these are not mandatory. If your party agrees to another document from a management company, it should be very similar to what we have. And just make sure you got the property codes in there. You know, if you don't, you got to put it in. You got to get that, because they probably, if they're using their own, they may not even have property codes in there. They might even be outside of the state of Texas where these forms are coming from. So we got to protect our people. Okay, this is the residential lease and inventory condition report that I was telling you about. So you can see it got everything you can possibly think of on here: the doors, the patio, the garage, you know, all these things. So here's the move-in comments and here's the move-out comments. So if you had a broken window, you could put that on here. You could put, you know, there's a hole in the wall, whatever, hole in the ceiling, stain in the ceiling, you know. So it's got everything in here. If you can take pictures along with it to protect your party, and you can save them, you can upload them into Back Agent, then you've got all this. And then a year from now, when they're ready to move out, you've got all this evidence of the condition of the property when they moved in. And then, was there a question on this?
Brenda's got her hand up, and so I just wanted to make sure that we're able to answer her question.
Okay, go for it.
Unless she put the hand up. Okay,
I put
Brenda.
it up earlier and forgot to take it down. Sorry.
Oh, no, you're fine. I
Okay.
saw it up, and I just wanted to make sure that we acknowledged it. Okay, Mal, keep going.
Okay, all right. Okay, so this is what he was saying about the ABB agreement between brokers. So here we would put the property, here you'd put what your fee is according to the MLS. If there's any renewal fees, you know, I really don't pay attention to these renewals. I mean, that's up to you. If you can get everyone to agree to it, usually they don't mean anything. A year from now, you know, who knows? People have asked about this one, about if you put a price in here. Again, I would say no, because it's not enforceable. I don't put anything in there. I recommend that you guys work with a tenant and get them to love you. You're going to follow up with them. You're going to be sending them emails. You're going to be sending them information about other properties for sale when it gets close to the end of their lease. And they're going to sign up a buyer rep agreement with you for buying a year from now. And you're going to write a contract, whether it's the same house that they're in or otherwise. If you put something in here, a lot of landlords won't even do it. And I just say, leave it blank and stay in touch with your people and get them to work with you no matter where they buy. Okay? Any questions on that? Remember the W-9, if we have to pay somebody, we need to get the W-9 from the other broker, and they're going to ask you for a W-9 if they're going to pay you. So in our W-9s are on Back Agent. If you go to Office and Documents, you'll scroll down, you'll see the 2021 W-9 from Competitive Edge. That's all you got to do. Just send it to them. Any questions on this document? Okay, I think, and we already went over okay, so we went over all of that. Let me see if I can go back here. Oops. Right. Exit forms again. Any questions on working with the tenant? You know, working as a tenant rep. Okay. So now
And now we're at 10:44, so just giving you.
Okay, okay, we should be good. We should be okay. Okay, so. Why am I? There we go. Okay. Okay. Okay, so this is your listing agreement to, for a lease. So this is a separate deal. Can you have more than one? Can you have it for sale and for lease at the same time? Yes, but it's two different agreements and be two MLS numbers. So some people say, well, I'd like to sell it. If I can't sell it, I would like to lease it. Or I'd like to lease it, but if I can't lease it, I want to sell it. So you can have both in MLS. There's not a violation of anything. So here you'd fill in, the information, the property description, just like a regular listing. You're going to put the rent, the listing price, $2,000, and when it begins, when it ends, 60, 90, 120 days, whatever you put in there, that's your business. Remember to put, if you're charging 1 month's rent and you're going to split it, you want to put 100% on here. I made the mistake one time of putting 50%, thinking that's just for me. And then next thing I know, I got zero because I had to pay the other agent 50%. So make sure you put that in there. You can do renewals. I don't do any of this. I don't do any of this at all for the landlord, because it's a separate. There's so much more detail when you start talking about selling, later. You just got to stay in touch with them. And if they decide to sell it, then you get a new listing agreement and you get everything filled out. So this is just really, to me, it's a negative when you start asking for extra stuff. If you guys are using, we don't use transaction coordinators for leases anyway. So again, protection period. It changes to Henderson County. Put in MLS. It's very similar to, just a regular listing presentation. The document is almost exactly the same. And if you look down here, okay, we're going to put a key box on the door. There will be a mention of, I think the property code is maybe not on this one. I'm not sure. I know on the application, the actual lease, there is. But read through this. It's a listing agreement, just very similar to just a regular listing. It has all the promises and obligations and all that. Okay? I'm gonna move on here. Oh, here you can talk about, how they're going to do the payments, whether you're going to do it electronically, how you're going to pay, if there's any late fees, you can put all that in the listing agreement. Talks about a pet deposit, a pet agreement. If, a pet deposit of $250, these are just what I put. That's up to you. You can do whatever you want to. And we'll be glad to go over yours when you get one. There's a lot of stuff that you can put on here. Okay. Built before 1972, you got lead-based paint, got the same situation with that. Anything built before 1978. Okay.
And Mal, I just want to bring up, it's not necessarily related to leases, but we had a situation. I was helping an agent, and the seller's disclosure on a buy was filled out. And of course, our agent was representing the buyer. And we were looking over the seller's disclosure that the seller had posted, and it was a 2005 home, but the seller had marked that there was lead-based paint exposure. And so I told our agent, I said, more than likely, they probably checked that in error.
Right.
but at this point we don't know, and so go ahead and fill out the lead-based paint addendum. So that way, and then if the listing, I said, and once you send over your offer with that included, if the listing agent comes back and says, why did you include that? Say, well, per the seller's disclosure that you posted to the public.
Right.
And if the listing agent says that, oh, well, that was an error, then, as an agent, you just ask them to get their seller to redo their seller's disclosure. And then, of course, it's not going to be part of the contract. So even some stuff like that on a buy, just reviewing, just because the listing shows that it's not prior to 58, always
Right.
double check the seller's disclosure, because if it's marked yes, then you want to do your due diligence and have the lead-based paint addendum added to it too. So.
Perfect. Absolutely. This is okay. Remember when you do a sale, a listing for sale, you're going to have a data input sheet, residential. Well, this is the one for the lease. So there's two different forms. And if you've never done a listing for a lease, this is the form you want to use. I mean, and this is exactly the way it's set up in MLS. So if you fill this out completely all the way through, I mean, it's huge. Schools and baths and, the room sizes and all of that. If you fill this out and fill all these little details out, I think there's a place on the bottom for the seller to sign it. Yeah. It's got everything on here, and then there's it's huge. Yep. See, it's got a place for the seller to sign it, that this is the data that you are going to put into MLS. This is a great document if you've never done a lease before to complete this, because it's got everything in there that you're going to need. And then when you go to input on the MLS, it's going to follow the exact format that this is set up on. So you utilize this thing. This is called the residential lease data input form. And it's in your transaction desk or in zip forms, whichever one you're using. Okay. Now the lease itself, this is where, if you're representing the landlord, this is where you're going to get with the landlord and you can say, okay, we've approved the tenant. We've done all the credit checks and everything looks good. We're now ready to execute this lease. So here you would put, this is like the contract, and this is quite lengthy. I don't know how many pages are on here, but you probably are going to need some help with this. So call Maureen or Danelle or myself and let us go over, the terms on this thing so you get it right. I mean, you got a commencement date, you got an expiration, you got the, automatically renewal date 30 days before. It's got initials for everybody to initial on here. I mean, this is your what your monthly rent is, how you're going to get payment. Is it going to be a check? Is it going to be mailed? Is it going to be money order, electronic? The rent is, if there's prorated rent, the first day of the month. Here's the place of payment. What I did with mine, the ones I used to, when I did a lot of rentals, I would give them my bank account and give them deposit tickets and say, just go to the bank each month and just deposit in my bank. And that way, that was one way to do it. But people can do PayPal, they can do, whatever electronic ways you want to do it. Here it talks about the method of payment again, electronic payment. These are all choices that you're going to have to do. Then late charges. This is just how I do mine. I recommend something like this, that, if you don't receive the rent by the third day, there's going to be a penalty, late charge, $50. You got to be careful not to go too high with some of these things. There are some rules on exorbitant charges but here, $25 a day additional. So if they don't make the payment by the third day and you charge them $50, then $25 a day is, a penalty. So that usually motivates them to get in there. Return payment, if their check bounces, you get a deal there. Here's if they don't have a pet and they don't have a pet agreement, that there's going to be a charge We had one of my agents in with Remax had this thing in here, and they went over and checked the house, and there was a pet and dug a bunch of holes in the backyard and did damage to the back door. And so they had to pay some big dollars to because they didn't have a pet agreement. So they can't violate that without a penalty. Here you'd put the security deposit. Usually it's around the same as the first month's rent. You want to get that up front. You know, usually the security deposit, once you get an approval of the lease and you get it executed, that's when the security deposit should be made. And a lot of people don't do this, but I mean, this is now a contract, and there has to be consideration when there's a contract. So if you get everyone to agree to this and everybody signs off, you should get the security deposit, even if it's 10 days before the move-in date. And then the rent is actually due on the first of the month. But once you have an executed, and if you don't do this, then the people change their mind, then you have nothing to go back to. So I always try to get the security deposit payable upon execution of this lease, of this agreement, not the actual move-in date. Here it talks about the property code 92, right in the lease, that it has to be, it has to be in here. And so it's really a pretty neat thing that's in there. So you can bring this to your landlord and say, if you're going to be a landlord, you've got to comply with the state of Texas on that. Who pays utilities, pretty standard. Here you'd list the occupants of all the people in the house, whether they're kids or not, and their ages. Name and ages of all occupants. That gets listed here. And if you have guests, how long can a guest stay? I put 14 days. I mean, you might put 30. I mean, what if you have a mother-in-law that comes down and helps with a childbirth or something like that? It might be longer. So you could change that. How many vehicles? You can change this number. These are just options that you can put in here. If you're the landlord, if they live a long ways away, they might want to charge for a trip charge to come and check on the property. That's up to them. The key box. Okay, so the listing. I mean the lease is almost up, 60 days out. And if they agree to this, then you can put a lockbox on the door 60 days before the lease expires, and then you can show it to other people. You're going to work that out with the tenant. And then you can put something like this in there. If they decide they don't want to have a lockbox on the door 60 days out, then they're going to pay an additional fee. I mean, there's so many things in here that you just got to read through with your landlord to make sure they understand what they're signing. Here's that inventory and condition form. How they move out. Who maintains it? What's the responsibilities on yard maintenance and watering? Isn't this exciting?
It is. Very.
Smoking. How about that? I mean, do you allow smoking?
No, it's a pathway to some income. So
it is. Do you allow the tenants to smoke in the house? I mean, that's, again, your landlord's going to have to decide that. And then who do they request the repairs to? It should go to landlord. We don't do property management in this company, so the landlord has to take care of that. Again, talking about property code 92 all the way through this thing. So this is all part of the, you can look through that property code. Is pretty extensive. What they'll pay for, what they're not paid for. Here's the property security devices and exterior doors, property code 92. So, I mean, I'm not making this up. So, this is real stuff. I mean, they're signing this. All the people are, and it's, the liability is tremendous. Holdover is what you would do if the tenant decides that after the lease is expired, that they stay there. And you've got 3 times the amount of the monthly rent. We don't do any subleasing either, so. And these are all, early termination. I mean, you just got to read through this. And there's things about military, if they get orders to leave. I mean, there's exceptions to the deal. There's all kinds of things in this Property Code 92. Even family violence is in here. Sex offenders and stalking. The tenant, they have a right to terminate if there's offenses taking place in that area. Subletting, we don't do subletting. Attorney fees, representations. Okay, this is pretty extensive stuff. But
Now, I think that the most important thing, because there's so many different forms for different types of transactions. It's the biggest thing is going through each one. And, we don't necessarily have to memorize every single section.
No.
Knowing that, reviewing it, and then, if there's questions, of course, calling us. But you got to be able to read through to see why templates may be filled out the way they are. And if it's already pre-filled out, don't just skip over it, because you may be skipping over something that may be pre-filled out that doesn't really apply to your transaction. So reviewing all of that to make sure that it's appropriate.
Right.
I also
think
that you need to encourage your tenant to really read that lease. You know that when we send these things for electronic signature and they're back in 2 seconds, that they haven't even read the lease. And I think that, we as the agent really need to work hard to encourage the tenant, prospective tenant, to really know what they're signing. And if they have questions regarding that property code, just send them the link and encourage them to read the property code.
and the same thing with the landlord. I mean, the landlord, most of the people that are landlords are not, experienced in being a landlord. What's the negative? What's the, what about replacement of normal wear and tear is excluded from any deposits. And, they have to, when the lease is up, they have 30 days to return the deposit. So if they're not going to return the entire amount, they've got to have justification for holding money back. Like if there's a hole in a wall or a broken window or something that the tenant did during the year that's not on that property condition. So, for the small amount of money that you make, there's a lot of work involved with leases, and just make sure, but the liability is huge. There's more liability on these leases than there is with a sale. So just be careful and take the time and just think, okay, this is a client that I'm going to get business down the road. So I'm going to really take the time and give expertise to make sure that the parties are treated correctly, and that a year from now, when everything is said and done, that they're a happy camper, and you've got to develop your business plan.
And that they seriously do, both the tenant and the landlord, do take those pictures so that you have them saved somewhere. So if the landlord, takes the pictures of his property, prior to the move-in of that tenant, and puts it, away somewhere, and then before it close, when the tenant moves out, all of a sudden they notice there's a big gaping hole somewhere, and you've got proof that it wasn't there prior. So it protects both sides.
Right. All righty. So we're standing by to help you on these. Anybody have any questions off the hand? Elliot, you good?
Yes, I got a question.
Yeah,
Can you talk about Section 8?
Section 8.
Okay, Section 8. I know there's some people that want to work Section 8 housing. It's low income properties. It goes through the housing and urban development. I I don't do any. We don't really recommend you do them. If you want to get involved in it, then there's a couple of people that have asked about this just in the last 30 days. My suggestion would be to call Dallas, the city of Dallas, that Housing and Urban Development, and you may have to make an application. They pay by vouchers, so whether they even pay a commission on it, I'm not sure. Most landlords don't want to mess with it because there's a time delay on getting payments, and it comes from the government, from the city. So it's subsidized housing is what it is. And so I personally, as your broker, would recommend that you spend time with our, where you're going to get compensated for the work you do. And there's a lot of other ways to do it other than Section 8 housing. It's a difficult and low income producing process. But if you want to do it, go for it, and maybe you can become an expert and tell us what you're going through.
Now, my question is, how you say if you get a tenant and they are Section 8, they have a Section 8 voucher, how do you go about and say no to them, that you can't help them? Is it okay to say no?
All of the properties in MLS that are for sale, that are for lease, very, very, very few of them are ever going to even do Section 8. They got to go to like an apartment complex or something, a low income area. But you're not going to find, in MLS, the landlords are not going to want to do it. You can check and see if they will, but I would say that your chances are going to be slim that you're going to get very much out of it. So just have to get a case-by-case situation and call each agent and say, would you entertain a lease from Section 8 housing? And I can almost guarantee you 95% of them or more are going to say no.
So is that what you say your tenant, your
Yeah, just
buyer,
tell your tenant that is very,
your client, if they have a
you're going to have to find, their best bet is to go to the city of Dallas, if they're in this, or Denton County or whatever, and find out where their Section 8 housing is available, and then start there. Not going to be an MLS. You can go in, you can search in the remarks section of MLS and type in Section 8 and see if you can get any. Maybe you'll get a few. But it's going to be very difficult to find a landlord that's going to be wanting to mess with Section 8 housing. But call the city that they're interested in and find out where the locations are. And usually they're apartment complexes or townhouses that they have a section. Like I know in Carrollton, there's a big section right by Long Elementary School that has Section 8 housing.
There's quite a bit in Frisco and in Little Elm also.
Yeah, so they should just check out and see where they are, and then you can find out if they pay a commission. And if they don't, just lead your people to it and let them do it. That's a toughie, Okay.
Elliot, did you have a question?
Thank you.
Okay, we're good. All right.
Nobody else? Nobody else?
Any other questions on leasing?
And I know there's still people on the call that have done leases. Any success that you want to share with us before we end the call?
I have done lease last year actually, and just wanted to give out a tip. When screening the tenant, you may want to make a list of the question that you want to ask, from pay stub, 3 times a pay stub, and all those kind of questions. So when they call you, it's a good idea to have a list of questions in front of you.
Right.
That's great feedback. Thank you.
That's good. And I'll say one more thing about leases. When they fill out, if you had somebody that had like a bankruptcy or a foreclosure or bad credit, and they tell you that up front, and they say, well, no one's going to lease to me. Well, that's not really true. I mean, when you're dealing with a lease, if you can talk to the other agent and get the story of the tenant applicant. Why do you have bad credit? well, I was in a car accident and, you know, I was hospitalized and I lost my job and now I got my job back again. But all during that time, I wasn't able to pay my bills. Now I'm paying my bills again. I mean, that's a hardship story, and that story may work. I mean, I did that on mine. I had several lease properties in the Dallas area, and almost every tenant that I released to had a hardship story to tell me, and they were great tenants. You know, they leased from me and paid on time, and so don't give up on them because they got bad credit. Find out what the story is, you know, get them to tell you, and then you relate that to the other listing agent and say, I've got a situation here. I mean, I had one where I had a sex offender. You know, this guy called me and he says, I want to lease a property, but I've got a record. And I said, what is it? Do you want to share it? And he said, yeah, I have a record for a sex offender. And I said, well, you probably aren't going to be able to lease anything. He said, well, here's my story. My story is I had a girlfriend and she was underage, 17. We had consensual sex, and her parents found out about it and they filed on me, and I have a record now because of it. And when he told that story, I mean, he really was not a sex offender. He just got into a situation. He wasn't very smart, but that's his business. And, you know, I found a landlord that said, hey, I understand how that can work. So they leased it to him and he's still there as far as I know. So don't give up on them because they got a situation. Just get the story and relate it to the other agent, and you may be able to save somebody from, you know, being out in the street somewhere. Okay.
Yeah, can I piggyback on that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say that most of my lease successes have been with communicating with the other side, and not just being an agent that just sends the application over and you're in not direct contact. I can't tell you how many listing agents I've had tell me, well, I don't even know, I've got 10 applications I'm looking at, and not one of these have called me and talked to me. And so just communicating with them, and then encouraging with your clients who have a story. And if not, because there's so much competition, even with leases right now, that if you have them write a heart letter, you know, and I always encourage that, because all they have to go off of is the application or, you know, paper. So if they can kind of get into the story of who these people are that might be living in the home, it helps them, you know, to understand who they may accept in. So
Perfect. Very good. Absolutely. Well, very good, guys. We will pick this up again on Tuesday. We'll probably do agency, and unless Danelle has something extra that she wants to do, we'll cover on that. But we'll have a good session for sure.
Yeah, you never know. I may throw in a Kahoot game.
There you go. Hey, that sounds good.
I'll come up with some good questions.
There you go. Sounds good. All righty, guys. Thank you guys for your attendance.
Thank you, Mel.
Thank you.
thank
Have
you.
a wonderful day, everyone. Good
You too.
weekend. You know
Bye-bye.
where we live if you need anything.
Bye.